The ANC is headed towards its policy conference this weekend. The party has put together some policy papers which are up for discussion as it looks at renewal, economy, the housing, international relations, among other topics. The conference is set to take place and will be expected to take stock ahead of the party's elective conference in December. Let's look at this now with Angelo Fick, who's a research director at AUWALSocio-economic Research Institute. Professor Bheki Mngomezulu is a senior lecturer in the University of Western Cape's Political Science Department. Thank you so much to you both for your time. I'll begin with borrowing some of the words of President Cyril Ramaphosa in his foreword. He says that our movement equally faces enormous challenges in this period, as witnessed by the decline in support with the 2021 local government elections. This mirrors the declining level of trust and credibility in us as leadership and cadres. Professor Mngomezulu, I'll start with you when it comes to this one. These reflections are, by the president contained in the foreword of these, policy discussion documents. Is this a true reflection of the party, or will you say he has not really begun to comprehend the trouble that the party finds itself in?
No, thank you very much, Mngete. Firstly, I think it's an honest reflection because if you look at the 2019 general election, the ANC support dwindled somewhat. And then come 2021, that one was a disaster, honestly speaking, even though people would tell you that the party might have lost here, gained here. And so the reality of the matter is 18 municipalities slipped away, 17 of them going to the IFP, and then, of course, one going to the DA. For the very first time, the DA got a municipality in KwaZulu-Natal, which is Umngeni. So I think from that standpoint, then I would say it's a correct assessment of the situation, but it doesn't, of course, cover the whole thing because the problem is much more than that. The reason why the ANC is losing support is where the focal point should be, because unless you identify that problem and address it now, come 24 to 24, the situation might even be worse than what we have already seen.
And Angelo, looking at, the recent regional conferences where we saw fierce contestation, issues around the step-aside resolution, and now you're looking ahead in this particular context to the party's policy conference. Is this a party that is more inward-looking, or is this one that is ready to tackle the challenges that are facing South Africans?
I think I agree with Professor Mngomezulu that there is a crisis that the party is facing, and it's taking some stock of that. But I think there are two separate issues that the party has to face. One is its internal dynamics and policies around those internal dynamics. And we know that the party has struggled for well on a decade to sort out its branches. Who can forget that spectacular confrontational difference between the then president of the party, Jacob Zuma, in 2015, reading out the numbers of members the party has, and the then Deputy Secretary General, J.C. Duarte, doing the press rounds by correcting those numbers by suggesting the president had looked at an older document that hadn't reflected the new numbers. So the corruption at the branch level of how discipline happens is an issue. We've seen in January 8th statement after January 8th statement, in conference proceedings after conference proceedings, talk about political discipline and political education. And part of the issue is not just auditing the delegates in the branches, but also the quality of so-called cadres who come out of those branches and go to these conferences. And that, I think, is major issue that the party will have to face in terms of its own internal policy development. In terms of policy development for the country, yes, it will have to face issues of major consequence around employment, around the climate catastrophe, around a variety of other social dynamics. And one's fear is that the party is very much stuck in the 20th century, and this is reflected in the gap between its leadership and the majority of the country. This is a majority young country in which most people are 30 and younger. This is a party that's run by people in their 60s and 70s, and we need to take stock of what that gap will mean.
And Angela, let me stay with you on that point and take a step back to, you talk about the January 8th segment, which was quite big on the branches and how they now need to go back to the branches. Even yesterday, President Cyril Ramaphosa talking about the state of the branches, saying that they need to, really, really ensure that things are functional at branch level. But what kind of delegate are they producing? Is it one that is going to be able to grapple with the issues that South Africans are faced with? Because whatever policies come out of this particular conference, should they be in government again in 2024, this is going to be critical in the direction of the country.
So I think part of the ANC's tension has been that tension between its vanguardist leadership and the bottom-up democratic principles that are built into the party's constitution. So by all means, the branches should feed up information, issues from the ground up as people at branch level experience them from their constituents and communities. But the leadership also takes a particular vanguardist approach in terms of policy, in where to drive, and leading those branch delegates and feeding to those branch delegates issues that they think ordinary people should know. And that tension, I think, is beginning to wear thin as the party loses electoral support, because one of the problems that the party has faced is that its cadre deployment policy has matched very nicely with patronage politics. And so the fight for the fewer positions in government deployment with lower electoral returns will only become more vicious and slightly less likely to be ideological and much more about having access to and control over the resources that any deployee in government will have access to maintain patronage relationships. And that's a difficult road for any post-liberation movement political party to navigate. We've seen other parties, former liberation movement, become governing parties, founder along similar principles elsewhere on the continent and even elsewhere in the post-colonial world in Latin America. And we're beginning to see those crises work themselves out even in developed countries' politics. The Conservative Party in the United Kingdom, the Republican Party in the United States, the Liberal Party in Australia are examples of parties where patronage politics and the influence of millionaires, billionaires, and the money that funds the party begins to skew the kinds of delivery principles and delivery prerogatives that a party may wish to have in its policy documents.
Now, Prof, listening to Angelo, he talks about, the patronage system, which doesn't necessarily benefit quite a lot of people. It benefits a few. And I'd like to get your thoughts on this one, because Charles Ngakula, for example, writes in his opinion letter that the cancer that the ANC must deal with is the hostility by some members to the themes of strategy and tactics, as well as to theory and ideology. Some members do not embrace those matters because they see political discourse as delays to their ascendance to positions of leadership and access to resources. When they are at meetings, they talk resources, what tenders should go where. This he writes ahead of this weekend's policy conference. I'm listening to Angelo. It sounds like if what Angelo is saying is correct, according to your assertion as well, Charles Ngakula may have hit the nail on the head.
In a way, hit the nail on the head, but the most important question is why is it so? For me, the bottom line is that you have, which basically speaks to the points that Angelo was referring to. It speaks to the caliber of the leadership, and it speaks to the caliber of the membership. Those of you who understand English will tell you that the fish rots from the head. So basically what it means is that if there are problems with the leadership, not with the leader, with the leadership as a collective, if there is a problem there, don't expect miracles at a branch level. Because ordinarily, you would expect that new members of the party should be initiated into the party. And the best way to do that is to basically workshop them on the party's policies, agendas, and all of that. So that by the time they leave that meeting, they have a clear picture as to what the party stands for, and then how they are going to project the image of the party. But if that information is not forthcoming, people are going to do as they wish or do as they think it's right. And that is the problem. So now when it comes to the nomination process to nominate people who are going to stand for certain positions, you are basically shooting in the dark. You don't even know what you are aiming for. You just shoot and then say, if you are lucky, you are going to hit a target. So the kind of leaders you produce through that process cannot be the machines that can be controlled and then suddenly perform miracles, because they don't have what people refer to as the intellectual capital of the party, understanding the party in its entirety, so that if there is something that is happening in the party, you would understand the party's policies and the party's principles. I'll give you an example. Those of us who have been studying the ANC for years will tell you that the ANC believes in collective responsibility. That is one of the things that has defined the ANC over the years, to the extent that the leaders of the party would normally say, we have decided to do this, we have decided to do that. Why do they say so? It's because they don't take unilateral decisions. Whatever decisions they take, they are taken as part of the collective. So that if the party doesn't perform well in the 2019 general election and it doesn't perform well in the 2021 local government election, you don't blame certain individual. You say, we have messed up. Let us go back and correct the situation. That is the only way you can do it. If you are not educated about the party's principles, obviously you are going to use emotions and forget about using your intellectual skills to try and understand the situation and then find answers that are going to be durable and then take the organization forward.
Now, Angelo, part of what this process is going to be about is to also take stock of what has been working and what has not been working. But when one goes through the documents, for example, you think of the school curriculum when it comes to language policies. The party talks about how it hasn't received the data, report that accounts for whatever that period that they're talking about, and this also makes it difficult for the delegates that are meant to be taking stock of the party's key policies and whether or not they're working or they should be scrapped. It makes it difficult for them to gauge how it has done if, even by its own admission, it has no data in some of its own documentation.
So that again speaks to the issue that Professor Mngomezulu points out, which is intellectual capacity and intellectual capital. This is not information that's hidden in South Africa. This is a country that's very well researched by its intellectuals, by the universities, by the varieties of policy think tanks, and also, most importantly, by Stats South Africa. We know, for example, that for well on a decade, 78% of 10-year-olds couldn't read for meaning. We know what the causes of those are from the people in education faculties who studied this phenomenon and started explaining it. So this is not information that's hidden. So the fact that they say they don't have data is to ignore what is in the public domain, has been written about in the popular press, but is certainly available through our various research institutions. The Human Rights Research Council, the Center for Scientific and Industrial Research, the National Research Foundation. These are all institutions that have generated enough information about our society for us to actually formulate good policy. And so here again, the point about whether these particular people from the branches up have the ability, or never mind the luxury, to pursue the information that is available, and whether the party encourages that, or whether it becomes about leadership contestations based on personality, is entirely an internal matter that the ANC has to resolve. This is not a South African problem. We know what this country's problems are. We've diagnosed it. We know what the policy positions could be that could solve those problems.
And Prof, one of the things that people are now, some are saying in some sectors that we need to go back to 2017 when there were calls that the policy conference must not be a policy conference. In fact, it must be a consultative, process that really looks at diagnosing and dealing with some of the issues. It's back on the table for some people, and they say this is a moment where the party should consider a consultative option as opposed to a policy conference. Your thoughts on that?
Honestly speaking, I'm not averse to that idea, given the number of challenges that the organization is currently facing. And then, of course, given the fact that 2024 is just around the corner. So if these issues are not resolved now, then, of course, the situation will get out of hand. You might have seen signs of this in 2021 already. And then the question is, what has happened between 2021 and now? Has the party learned from those mistakes? Has it addressed the issues that were concerns for the electorate, which then forced the majority of them not to vote even after they had registered to vote? So those are some of the critical questions. So if those particular issues have not been addressed, and then the party is preparing for 2024, and then there is this uncertainty and confusion about the step-aside resolution. So obviously, calling for a different, let's say, a formation is quite important in this one. On this one, so don't deal with the policies until you know exactly what the problems are, and then reach consensus, not just simple majority. Reach consensus as to how we are going to deal with those issues, because there is a difference. If you are only going for a simple majority, then of course you're going to miss the point, because it means that those who have the numbers will win the day. And the majority is not always right, by the way. So it means that if those who have the numbers win the day, and then, of course, the problems still remain. Then come 2024, it will be a disaster. So I agree that indeed it's a point worth considering, but it's up to the ANC to make the determination. No outsider will force that idea to them. They have to make a determination if they are serious about winning the election in 2024, or even doing better in 2024.
And as we then wrap up, Angelo, I'm keen to hear your thoughts, because Prof seems to think that it may be, an opportunity to look at a more consultative process as opposed to a policy conference, as he says. Then I don't know, for you, what does it say, to South Africans who are complaining about bread and butter issues, who are looking to some of these policy proposals to be able to address some of their everyday challenges? They're going through a pandemic. There's, a cost of living that is skyrocketing. A lot of people are battling bread and butter issues. Listening to this, then, what does it say as we go into the weekend?
So the party will have to address the employment issue. It will also have to address people's immediate demands that have, been long-standing for decades since it's come into power. Issues of housing, issues of schooling, issues of opportunity. But beyond that, the party also, if it takes its vanguardist role seriously, has to address the future that young people face in the century ahead. And here, I think, the elder leadership of the party is really out of touch in terms of the energy policy, in terms of building that future and making it possible for young people to live to 2080 without a world that is coming undone around them. And here, transnational actions by young people are going to become increasingly important. And so, yes, a consultative forum would be useful. But it would begin with the party consulting what the researchers that are paid by taxpayers tell us about the society and the solutions, instead of simply returning to those 20th century orthodoxies around poverty, around development, around industrialization, around energy. This is a 21st century world with 21st century crises unfolding. We cannot continue to have just the rhetoric or the slogans of the 20th century come out of the mouths of the most powerful party in the political spectrum in South Africa, whatever its weaknesses internal may be.
And it's going to be interesting then as we continue to unpack, these policy discussion documents. I mean, you think about housing, for example, and the various proposals that are made in there, some of them even looking at taking stock and really, making a digital process when it comes to some of, the housing issues around the RDPs and all of that. So let's leave it there with you, both of you, for now. Thank you so much for your time. That's Angelo Fick, a Research Director at AUWALSocio-economic Research Institute, Professor Bheki Mngomezulu, a Senior Lecturer at the University of Western Cape's Political Science Department. We'll continue to bring you more throughout the course of the week of what is contained in these policy documents.